Alrighty, Jake Stuart with the National Sports Media Association. Today, we're with Kevin Tresolini, 13-time Delaware Sports Writer of the Year. Excuse me, Kevin. Thank you so much for your time today.
Great to be with you, Jake. Thanks very much for having me.
So Kevin's a Delaware sports beat writer. He's also covered 6 Olympics with USA Today. Kevin, what brought you into the industry way back when?
Well, that's a great question, Jake. I was one of those kids growing up in the 1960s who discovered the newspaper and how absolutely wonderful it was to spread it out on the living room floor and read every word that was in it. I was a big sports fan as a kid, loved sports. And every day our afternoon Bethlehem Globe Times would arrive at our house in Upper Bucks County, Pennsylvania, the rural area where I grew up. And the Bethlehem Globe Times would arrive in our mailbox outside our driveway at about 4 o'clock. And my younger brother and I would fight to see who could get it first, because the rule was if you got it first, the other guy couldn't bother you when you were reading it. So I would spread it out on the living room floor, spread over the living room floor, read every story about the Phillies and Lehigh University, where my father was a professor, how their sports teams were doing. I read all the baseball box scores, and I would probably spend about an hour every afternoon poring over that thing. And probably at some point I was reading one of those stories and I saw somebody's name on the top of it and just realized, oh my goodness, somebody's getting paid to go to these baseball games and these football games and these basketball games and write stories about it. So I was pretty young when I realized that would be a pretty interesting and fun and neat way to make a living. But aside from that, growing up in the 60s, a lot of newsy things happened then, and I was just kind of pretty fascinated with the news business. I used to actually get up and watch the CBS Morning News before I went to elementary school every day. There was a lot going on with the Vietnam War and what was happening in politics and just in society. So I just really kind of got very interested in delivering the news and how the news was delivered. So that kind of had a lot to do with it too, I think.
Well, the dedication, even as an elementary school kid, I guess it paid off. Yeah.
It did because I really did develop a pretty keen interest at a very young age in the news and producing it and how it came out. Yeah.
I'm just so fascinated with the fact that this is your 13th award, Kevin. Does this still mean as much as the first one for you?
It does. It does. I mean, I come from a small state. There aren't a whole lot of sports writers in Delaware, and as everybody has found out everywhere, there certainly aren't as many as there used to be. Just because of what has happened in our business. But I feel very fortunate to do something I have loved from the beginning, as long as I have been able to do it, because I love it now in my 41st year at the News Journal and at DelawareOnline.com. I love it as much now as I did when I first started out. I mean, I still get a thrill about being able to put in words something that people will be able to read and enjoy and learn from. It's still something I feel very fortunate to do. I mean, this past fall was my 41st season going to high school football games and reporting about those. And I was just tickled pink to be out there that first Friday night with the lights on and the band playing and the team running out, and just, to capture the excitement and the enthusiasm. It's something you never really get tired of, and I feel very fortunate to do it as long as I've been able to do it, no doubt about it.
And can you speak a little bit to obviously growing up, you went to college at University of Delaware, and now you're writing in Delaware. You've been writing for a really, really long time. How does the small market kind of feel to you to be able to cover more high school and more kind of personal sports? What does that mean to you?
Yeah, that's a good question, Jake. When I got out of college, and I mean, I was one of those lucky college students. I made all my friends mad because I was one of those lucky college students who knew exactly what he wanted to do with his life, and I've been able to do that. When I started at the News Journal, because of where we're located, we're very close to Philadelphia, and we cover Philadelphia teams. And actually, in our early years, we're only an hour away from Baltimore. We also covered Baltimore teams very closely. We had beat reporters for all the Philly teams, but also the Baltimore teams as well in my early years at the News Journal. So when I started out, I was one of those guys who, in typical fashion, hey, I'm going to start out, I'm going to cover high school sports, and then someday I'm going to be the Phillies beat reporter, and I'm going to do that the rest of my life. It's going to be all about the Phillies and the Eagles and that kind of stuff. But once I got started, and I did get to do all those things, covering high school sports, college sports, pro sports, I really kind of realized that what I liked the most was covering the people who were actually in my backyard, the high school teams and the college teams. It's been great to cover the Phillies. I mean, I had champagne land in my microphone when I was covering, some Phillies games after they won the pennant in 2009, when I was interviewing Jimmy Rollins, and Ryan Howard's champagne pour kind of went over Jimmy and into my tape recorder. So, it's great. I've covered the Eagles in the Super Bowl. It's great. It's great to do that stuff, but I really love covering local teams and local kids and local people and local coaches, because they're in your community. And that's when you can really kind of make a name for yourself, develop a reputation as a journalist. The greatest compliment that I get from people is, hey, when I see a story with your name on it, I'm going to read it. And that's what you get from covering local sports for a long time, and being able to develop a reputation as a journalist who's fair and honest and knowledgeable.
You spoke too about just growing up at an early age, how you knew you wanted to be a sports writer, bringing the paper in and getting so excited about that. Were there some, sports writers growing up to that you really looked up to? So people that might have inspired you to become one yourself?
Yeah, probably. A lot of the early, a lot of the longtime guys, it's Sports Illustrated, guys like Frank DeFord and Curry Kirkpatrick, just to mention a couple. When I was probably for my birthday, when I maybe turned 10 or 11, my mother bought me a subscription to Sports Illustrated. That was the greatest gift a kid ever could have gotten, because that was like a textbook for me. I would read Sports Illustrated cover to cover every week when it came in the mail on Thursdays. If it didn't come on Thursdays, I was a mess. If it didn't come Thursdays, it better get there Friday. And I would pour over Sports Illustrated, read every story, and it was like a textbook for me. Just to read the great writing, that was in Sports Illustrated. There came a point where, I took over payments of the subscription when I was an adult, but I kept it for a very, very long time, really just until the last couple of years. But that was really where I developed just kind of the knowledge of, really how to write the incredible long form sports story, and just reading every newspaper that I could get my hands on. The local papers I had growing up in the Lehigh Valley, the Bethlehem Globe-Times, the Morning Call in Allentown, and then being down here in the Philadelphia area, just the great sports writers at the Philadelphia Bulletin, which doesn't exist anymore, the Philadelphia Daily News and the Philadelphia Inquirer, just a cavalcade of great sports writers at those papers, Bill Lyon, Frank Dolson, just to mention a couple, Mark Wicker, guys like that. Every time you read those stories, you learn more how to write a good story. And that always had a great effect on me. And it continues to have a great impact on me as a writer.
I'm sure it has. And, being sort of around for as long as you have, and being able to report on such, close knit events, I was curious, what is there a story that you think that maybe stands out to you as one that you feel very, very proud of, or one that, might be just your favorite to date?
Yeah, I mean, there have been a few of them. There have been lots of them. I've always kind of enjoyed writing the stories that are about people who've overcome adversity. One of the stories that I wrote last year, that was probably my favorite story last year, was about a young man who was a high school wrestler in Delaware, here at Smyrna High School, which has one of the top wrestling programs in the state. when you grow up in the Bethlehem, Pennsylvania area, like I did, Lehigh University has one of the great wrestling programs in the country. You really kind of become a wrestling fan. And I wrestled a little bit as a kid myself. My older brother was a good high school wrestler. So you really kind of develop a liking for that sport and the demands of it, and what the competitors have to go through. One of the stories I did last year was about a young man who had won a state championship, had won 2 state championships, and had lost in the finals in another year in high school. He'd lost his father, who had had some drug problems, but was still a really, really well-liked guy, had a very close relationship with his sons, who were all wrestlers. And this particular young man had kind of come into his senior year wanting to win a 3rd state title, and had been taken in by a local family that had really kind of helped him cope with the death of his father and the grieving that comes with that. And it was just a really interesting story about this young guy overcoming some adversity, dealing with it, coping with it, with the help of this family. That was one that kind of falls under that category. Last year, I did a story, boy, this was now a long time ago. This was probably about 30 years ago. We had a terrible story in Delaware one time where a family was on a ski trip and was flying a private plane into the airport in Burlington, Vermont, and this plane crashed. And everybody on the plane died except a young boy. I can't remember how old he was at the time, maybe 3 or 4. And this happened, I forget, back in the 80s, I guess. And I'd always kind of wondered how that boy had managed, how he was doing. Right. And then one year, a high school baseball coach called a score into the newspaper, and he mentioned that boy's name. And I said, "Hey, Steve, is that Larry? Is that Larry? Is that the boy who survived the plane crash?" And he said, "Yes, it is. And he's the greatest kid." And I ended up, he was a sophomore then, his senior year. I wrote a story about him and how his life had turned out and what he had done. And it was actually a really, really positive and uplifting story about how he'd been raised by his aunt and uncle and cousins, and, what a really, really good life he had. He's now a very successful attorney locally. That's probably number 1 on the list, though.
Wow. That's such an inspiring story. You just get goosebumps hearing something like that.
Yeah.
Well, I wanted to ask you, I know the last couple of years have kind of changed the industry, like you said, a little bit, especially, with COVID. What did that do to your work? How much did that change what you do on a day-to-day basis?
Yeah. Our industry has changed a lot. Yeah. We're a lot more focused now, less on game coverage and things like that, and more on watchdog type stories and bigger feature type things that might really track well on the web. Those kind of stories, which is fine. That's just, we've faced a lot of changes in our industry over the years. But yeah, COVID was interesting. When COVID landed in March of 2020, and there were no games, we looked for other things to write about, and it really wasn't hard. It really wasn't hard to find other things to write about. I didn't cover an actual sporting event until, I forget if it was July or August. I think it was July, when Delaware Park, our local thoroughbred racetrack, had its opening day, and then in August I went down to Dover Downs or to Dover International Speedway for the NASCAR race, which was held, of course, with no fans. But it was really strange to not cover any events for 4 or 5 months. It was really strange to work Monday through Friday from 8 to 5, which I did, after that. But we focused on a lot of watchdog type stories, like I mentioned, features, that often had to do with COVID and what people were doing because of COVID. There were newsy type things about sports being canceled and athletes having their eligibility retained and things like that. But I was able to do a couple of really interesting stories that because I had a little bit more time to kind of do some research, and spend some time digging into things a little bit. I was able to do a story about how the University of Delaware spends money on athletics, which was very interesting. I
Right.
did a story that allowed me to dig in a bit about the death of a racehorse at Delaware Park, which was very interesting. Delaware State University in Dover, Delaware, a historically Black college, which had had some academic progress report violations. I was able to dig in and do a good story about how HBCU schools were affected by APR violations, probably a little bit more than they should. And as that whole APR process maybe not really fair to HBCU schools. So I was really able to kind of dig in and spend some time looking into some deeper stories because of the time that the COVID situation allowed us.
Wow. Well, it seems like, just by prior to COVID and after COVID, just so much diversity with your work, whether it's in sports or out of sports, or just covering those big news stories. Well, the last question I wanted to ask you, Kevin, and thank you again for your time, is, if you had to give off some advice to maybe a younger sports writer, somebody that maybe wants to go down your path, what do you think you would offer?
Be enthusiastic, be willing to do anything, read a lot of stories, and be willing to kind of change with the times, because boy, if we had to do that, we really had to do that, as all my colleagues who are in the business know very well, as we've adapted to doing video and doing podcasts and standing in front of iPhones and standing behind iPhones and things like that. But the basics haven't changed. I mean, if you're going to write a good story or give a good report, you need to know how that is done. And to know how that is done, you need to know what a good story reads like and sounds like. So read good stories so you know how to write good stories. Watch good reports so you know how to give a good report yourself. I think that's probably the most important advice that I would give, Jake.
I think that's all very valuable, especially, in times like today when we don't know what the next thing's going to be and thrown our way.
Yeah, you got that right. The way things change. Yeah. Who knows what we'll be doing tomorrow, right?
Right. Seriously. Well, thank you so much for your time today, Kevin. Kevin C., 13-time Delaware Sportswriter of the Year. Thank you again, Kevin.
Jake, it's an honor to be with you. Thanks very much for having me, and congratulations to all the award winners.
Absolutely. Hopefully we'll see you this summer.
Great. I hope so too. Thanks.